Now, let me introduce Scott Wheeler. Born and raised in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom, Scott Wheeler, who publishes Vermont's Northland Journal, is on a 23-year mission to preserve the history and culture of the land of his birth. As he said, April will be the 24th year. Proud of the kingdom, he writes about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful, all of which make the kingdom the amazing place it is today. He sees no reason to sanitize its history, to portray the Northeast Kingdom as something it isn't, or to bend reality a bit to entice visitors. Instead, he insists the beauty of the working landscape, its history and culture, and the people speak loud enough to attract visitors from every corner of the world. Besides being a publisher of the Journal, Scott, a Johnson State graduate and a former Vermont legislator, hosts a weekly television show on NEK-TV called The Northeast Kingdom Voice, and a weekly radio show on WJJZ Country called The Vermont Voice. Each program is designed to serve as a forum for people to tell their stories and or promote community events. Scott is also the author of 6 regional history books: Rum Runners and Revenuers, Prohibition in Vermont, When Salmon Was King, Voices from the Clyde River, Don Sleepy McNally, From Vaudeville to Drive-In Pioneer, Newport's Centennial, Voices from a Lakeside Community, Jay Peak, Voices from the Mountain, and Booze in the Kingdom, Voices from Prohibition. Please welcome Scott Wheeler.
Thanks. So this is my first presentation since COVID. It was my first one and the first one since my wife died. She died almost 3 years ago. And I used to always introduce her because I used to always say, for those of you married, usually the other person keeps you in line. And by the way, guys, women are the stronger sex. Don't just get over it. Is my wife, before I would come up here, I used to tell people she was the one, because I can remember the greatest details, except for not to tuck my pant legs into my socks, maybe not to zip up my zipper. And so she would be scoping me out before I got up there. So this is my first one. So I'm probably a little rusty, but we talked about what we were going to do. And so the bottom line is I got started in it. I tell everybody I couldn't do anything else, so I decided to do this. I grew up as good old poor Vermonter, hard-working poor in the skunk. It seems like every region has a skunk hollow. So many skunk hollows around. I grew up in the skunk hollow section of Newport, and we were all working poor, and it's amazing what some of those people have done with their lives. And my father was what I called a junk collector. He loved history, but he could go to the dump and come home with more than he went with. And and by the way, he died like 2.5 years ago, and we're still sifting through it. And we're thinking, oh my God, if he can see us throwing this away, we've probably thrown away a fortune. We've had pickers come through. So I have no desire in collecting things, but I like to collect stories. I like to actually be able to sit down and talk to my history. So I don't focus so much more than 100 years ago. I do some of it, but hard to find people 150 years old to talk to. But I will delve into that. And a lot of those people that I've interviewed have left a great mark on my life. I can, if I had to, I could probably sit down and name almost everybody I've interviewed in 24 years and something that stuck out about them. And I did figure out that name. Remember? Yes. George Hollows. Does anybody know George Hollows? He used to live here. And he actually he was one of those people. He said something to me, and I have forever thought of it. His was, if you hate, they will have won. Because he said, if somebody can get you to hate them, it really eats you up. It burns at your soul. And the story of George here, he came here to work for Fairbanks. Then he went to work for EHV. George was Hungarian. When the Germans came in, he basically said, I'm not joining you guys. Oh yeah, watch this. And they sent him to a punishment battalion to the Russian front. And he ended up being captured and living in a gulag for several years where most of his people died. And so this little encounter with George where I recorded his story, I came that, that has become part of me. If you hate, they will have won. I mentioned how my wife died like almost 3 years ago. And a lot of these stories that I've recorded actually helped me put a little reference to what I was going through, because I've interviewed people who, there were so many people who lost children in childbirth, or just children in general. I've known, I've interviewed one person. He lost 2 siblings in World War II. She wasn't from here. Eva, the famed concentration camp survivor. I always butcher the name Auschwitz, Eva Kor. I got to be, she used to come on my show via the internet, and she lost almost her entire family in the camp. So when I think I'm having a bad day, I think of all the people I've interviewed over the years. 101 woman who lived to be 104, she said it was tough living that old because she had outlived all of her kids, including 2 who'd lived to be in their 80s. So I've the part of the people I have interviewed are now part of me. I'd like to think it's the good, because I actually have interviewed people who, I've interviewed a very unrepentant Nazi. He died in his 90s, and he went to his grave thinking the United States should have stayed out of the war. So we'll get on to how I choose to do stories. My writing began with the Chronicle in Barton. I worked there for several years. I have a degree in psychology, but I would take the education I received as a reporter back when reporters tried to focus. Oh, that was a little biased, but yes, I'm disappointed by the media, the modern day media, but I really learned a lot being a reporter, and just the ability in the state of Vermont, it's so open to be able to communicate. Like, you can call the governor up. It's just such a accessible state. And I learned so much. If I had to give up my years of college versus my years at the Chronicle, I would give up my my degree versus what I learned. So here's the man. This is George Aiken. Senator George Aiken. Depends on how you look at it. There is some debate. He's the man who is credited with naming Vermont's Northeast Kingdom. There was another group here, and that says, well, that isn't really true. He popularized it. Did he name it or popularize it? Well, I'm going to tell you, the first time I can find it nowhere in writing that for sure that it was used or went into writing before him. But I'm not saying he because in one place, in one speech, he says, I've heard it called the Northeast Kingdom. in another place, but then his widow, who I got to know well, Lola, his second wife, she said that it just came out of his mouth, but that isn't. So what we do know is the Northeast Kingdom, no matter what, it didn't just spring out of nowhere. It was at a time where we were trying to form an identity because, you know, it wasn't only because of our beauty, but it was also because of our poverty. Is they were trying to find some tagline to get this, you know, area known. The one thing I have found is that for a couple years they tried this slogan, but it never stuck. Land of Blue Waters. And that went on, that was all over the newspapers, Land of Blue Waters, and it just never, now which one is better, Northeast Kingdom or Land of Blue Waters? Then I finally, it actually took a lot of digging to actually find the exact date that Senator Aiken used it. It was at the Darling Inn on Depot Street. It was November 10th, 1949. And it took a few years to take off, but it eventually came to encompass the Tri-County region. And there's the there's the Darling Inn. And there is the most lovely Lola Aiken. Lola Aiken was just a wonderful person. She served as the senator's chief of staff for many years. She never married until George's wife died. When Senator Aiken's wife died, she married the senator, and she lived to be close to 100, and she was the wisest person because by the time the senator retired, he was starting to show his age, and anybody who knew him, she would be whispering in his ear to remind him who these people were, and she was a powerhouse in her own. And as I said, I went on to be, she spoke for me, she came on my shows, and she was just such a wonderful lady. Okay, right there with you, just a minute, he asked if he could play for you. This is my pet peeve about people sometimes when they record history. Sometimes it's just like all of a sudden we new arrivals, as in we come here and then poof, there is life. No, there was life before us. And this fella here asked if he could perform on behalf of the Abenaki, if he could perform a flute. So go right ahead, right here. This mural is at the museum at Odanak. I guess it's probably about 100 miles north of the border. The Abenaki Reservation. They have a spectacular museum that if you just go through there and you really study, you could probably spend a good part of a day. That was where Rogers Rangers raided the British, and then the Abenaki chased them down along the way and reaped their vengeances. So that was just one thing I always do, is because a lot of people, we forget that we are that before us were others, including the Abenaki. Okay.
Not to interrupt, but do we know what the Abenaki called the Northeast Kingdom?
We call it Northeast Kingdom in Dakina, which means our land. In Dakina, they call it means our land, not necessarily land owned by Europeans, but the land which shaped us.
And it's funny because a lot of people, like, sometimes things, just to make it sound more beautiful, like Lake Memphrey Magog there was once a person who published a book, and I don't think he meant it to mean that's what the lake meant, but he wrote it, the book was called Beautiful Waters. So everybody, until I started, because I actually contacted Odanak, because I'd heard that wasn't the real meaning of it. And beautiful, Memphrey Magog doesn't mean beautiful waters. It means something far less romantic. It just means like vast expanse of water or great expanse of water. So I do try to, if I can get a name, if I have a name that I want to know about or a region, I will contact the Odanak and they will help me. Sometimes this woman here is, how many people have been up to Newport and worked at the, but have gone to the East Side restaurant? Okay. This is Gertrude Essoff. Got a Lebanese last name because her husband was Lebanese. But her family would be Obomsoin, which several members of her family, the early years of the 20th century, left the reservation at Odanak and settled into the Newport region. And they were so poor during the Great Depression, she said that we used to get breadcrumbs and even pack them together and wet it down and put sugar on it. And then during the 1940s, she and her mother-in-law founded the East Side Restaurant. And that's why they haven't owned it since the 1990s. But she said she would never let anybody go hungry. They would pick up hitchhikers even. And if they were hungry, she would feed them because she knew what it was like to be poor. But she lived to be 102, and she was still singing and performing at 102. And she used to go back to the Abenaki reservation to take care of her family members. So there's Gert.
The Obama family to this day are known as their famous basket.
And there know what?
Famous basket.
Yeah. Oh yeah. True story. Yep. They used to come down and sell their baskets, right? Well, now I'm going to get on to one of my favorite topics, is prohibition. I've written 2 books on prohibition. And first of all, let me say, I have never even had a speeding ticket. I've lived a boring life. I got married at like 19 or 20. I remained faithful to my wife for 40 years. And I've never done anything wrong. I might like a beer now and then, but I've never done anything, at least been caught at, and I've often said, if I'm going to do something, I want to make it memorable. And so when I heard my grandfather had gone to jail for prohibition violations, I started dabbling in the prohibition to better understand it. And when I worked for the Chronicle, I did a series on prohibition, just interviewing people. My grandfather was long gone. And so this is Depot Street, when Lyndonville had as a 1932 or 33 Boston transcript said I don't know if it was a little bit of exaggeration, but had the highest number of people per capita in federal prison than any other community. But it wasn't because the locals were bad. It was because it became a haven for the big time drug dealers. Not drugs, yeah, but that's true now too. alcohol people. They didn't want to be too close to the border. So they would hire, the bigger people would hire the locals to go make the runs. And so Lyndonville was a real hopping place. There's just, and the interesting thing is they actually used their guns a lot more back then. Like what they would do is they'd go to shoot out your gas tank right here. Unfortunately, when we did see a gun, somebody shot high here. There was a case out in Jay where the officers didn't take into account the guy was going down the hill and they killed him. But a lot of people died during Prohibition. This is a Canaan line house. It looked like an old shack from the outside. If you could drink on the Canadian side, but technically you couldn't drink on the American side. This was a ramshackled old house, but this is what it looked like when you went in. I actually have an article coming up about these. Horses were also used. Small time people, the farmers and such, would use horses, usually old horses, and they would bring the horses over into Canada. And I don't know much about horses, but supposedly they have a homing instinct. They would drop them, they would load them up, and then send them across the border, and then they would then come back and go back to the barn. And the worst come to worst, which happened in this case, the horses got seized on the route back. Juliette Dane, she saw, a lot of people, they think about the romantic version of Prohibition, but they don't think about the death. She grew up without a father, and she wasn't very impressed with him either, because Juliette lost her father in a rum running accident. And, she said he did it to himself. He went out and she gave me, there's what remains of his car. The interesting thing was he was in the car doing the business with the chief of police of the city of Newport, because it wasn't rare for lawmen of the day to supplement their income. Not everybody, of course, but there was a fair number of people who went to the other side. Okay, before we get going on to this, so what did my grandfather do? It took me a long time. And my father didn't really know. He weren't born yet, but remember I said I wanted to do something memorable. Well, he did something memorable. It was just a small time operation. He was making moonshine and selling it in baby bottles with nipples on it. And in other words, it was just a small time. But I love that fact that if you're going to do something illegal, at least, use a little bit of humor. I loved it. Then I've done a bit of the history of Burke, which, as it's going, I guess things are looking a little better right now. I didn't write this story on Herman Hoyt. I'm not a one-man person in this operation. I have quite a number of people who submit articles, and I welcome everybody, all of you, anybody, if you have a story to tell about the Northeast Kingdom during an earlier time, just to submit something. And Amy Ash Nixon wrote this one, and he had just lived the history of Burke. So if you see a trend here, what I do is when it comes to these history things, I try to find somebody I can actually talk to. And then Jay Peak. Jay Peak was founded in the 1950s as Jay Peak Ski Area. Interestingly enough, one of the key players, as I was saying about the Germans, is the Germans played, or the Austrians, I should say in this case, the Austrians played a huge role in the American ski industry, including after World War II. They came here, and Walter Foger, fiery guy, German ski trooper. JP probably wouldn't be what it was without him. He really spearheaded it, and then it just took over the entire mountain. He was there for 13 years. But also, this is Helen Morse. She is now gone. Instead of just telling the history of Jay through the mountains, just through the ski area, because there's far more to Jay than that. Helen grew up in the, she grew up Jay, and she went to school on a horse-drawn sleigh in the winter and wagon, and then she and her husband took over that school bus route with a horse and buggy. And so she provided a different look at the history of Jay and not just the ski area. Here she is. She's a chapter in my Jay Peak book, which is now out of print. And there's Sonny Cody. He lived the history of Jay, and he provided me all kinds of photos to... Okay, now this isn't a political statement. I got to say this. I got to say this because this might be a hot topic. But anybody know who that is? Ski instructor at Jay Peak. Ivana Trump. Ivana Trump. Yes, Ivana Trump for a couple of years taught skiing at Jay Peak because she was a member of the Czech ski team. And they would come down from Montreal, because they were in Montreal, and her boyfriend still lives there, at the time, but I think her name was Winkelmeyer at the time. And yet that's Ivana Trump. So now you never, because I'm going to tell you, the mountains particularly, they bring a lot of prestigious, there's more famous people that go there. Like in our region up north, we just lost one very well-known, humble person was Donald Sutherland. Donald Sutherland was a regular, just a normal guy who lived right across the border, but he was just a regular fixture. Every once in a while, I'm not into TVs, Kiefer Sutherland would show up, but most people, it was just him. This, and how much longer? We must be ticking down.
Oh, you're really halfway through.
Oh, am I?
Yeah.
Oh.
You felt that.
How many?
You're that one speed, so.
Wait. Is early 70s. Yeah, early 70s. Because some of those people are still, a lot of these people can point themselves out. This is the story that I think everybody ought to know about. And I think it should be taught in every school because it's been made into major motion movies. It's been books. It's still debated today. Does anybody know what this is?
This guy built this giant missile.
Yeah, Dr. Gerald Bull in Space Research Corporation. And, he's even been made a bit more sinister than he really was. He started out as a child prodigy. I think graduated from college or something like when he was 16. He wanted to make guns that would, not rockets, but guns that would blow payloads into space. And fast forward, he set up in Highwater, Quebec, but the government helped him to make it to get in and out better with his products. He bought land, and he actually had entrance. They actually created a port of entry just for space research. And originally it was started out to like the Star Wars technology. He was Star Wars technology, as in shooting down missiles or incoming missiles, before President Reagan talked about it. So he really did do some good work. Then there's Dr. Bull.
Can I ask a question in the previous slide?
Yeah.
Are we looking at a missile there?
No. Oh, okay.
What is that?
Oh, that's one of his big guns. Okay, I should.
Big gun.
Yeah, big gun. See, these are actually off of a lot of his guns that he used were off of like battleships and such.
Yeah.
This was actually used to. Would have been used for propellant testing. They would have been blowing into a big berm. They wanted to find out what propellants worked best, and it would shake. You could hear it all the way from Jay to Newport, and it would rattle things off stuff off the shelves. They shot things straight up too, but most of the time they did the big gun testing down in Barbados. They had a place down there, and the interesting thing is, so then what happened was the United States, his funding started drying up from Canada, so the U.S. government got involved, and it started turning more towards weapons of war, and they started retrofitting different weaponry, and they started making their own. I wish I could have done a whole thing on.
Well, you sold them to South Africa.
Wow, yes, I'm good, yes. And
They were trying to shoot low-grade missiles miles.
Right.
In South Africa.
But there's more to the South Africa too.
Yeah.
Is the South Africa thing. This is where Gerald Bull got himself in hot water. Gerald Bull had another plant in Brussels, Belgium, which is called the arms dealing capital of the world. And so what he was doing is Belgium did not have an arms embargo against South Africa. So he was selling the parts that he made in the United States to the separate entity, his other business in Brussels, thus then putting things together and sending it to South Africa to fight who were they fighting now?
I don't know, but the idea was to kill off all their enemies.
Right, but here's the deal. So to make a long story short, because this is, they got books written on it, is when he was arrested, he and Colonel Gregory, they were like, oh, no, we got permission. The CIA, they gave us permission. They told us how to do this. And Dr. Bull he paid well, he treated people well, and he was astonished that the CIA did not come to his rescue. And this man here, I ended up interviewing him at length, and he was one of the very beginnings, Arthur Aiken of Newport. Well, he originally was in Canada, and Arthur showed me, and he did ask me Arthur's gone now, because most people who are in the hierarchy to this day won't talk about it because they worry for themselves. But Arthur was suffering from advanced Parkinson's, and he said, all right, we got to get some records straight here. And he laid out to me all the records that showed the U.S. government, their hands were all over that operation. And he was actually arrested, but just on minor charges when the whole thing went down. So Dr. Bull then he renounced his Canadian and American citizenships, and he was made an American through an act of Congress, just so he could do what he was doing for their government. So he was so upset when he got out of prison. He went to work for many people, including Saddam Hussein, and he was helping Saddam. Build a super gun. It was going to be a gun that leaned up against a mountain, and it was the direction of that gun that got him in trouble. It was Tel Aviv, and the Mossad gave him warning that, no, don't do that. He did it, and he was assassinated. There was debate for a few years whether it was the Mossad or the CIA. Both of them had reasons to have him disappear, but the Mossad later did say they took him out. So I think that is. Oh, there's his. This is the plan. So you can see most of it was in Canada, but they needed, with the government help again, they needed to get, without having to go through the main port, they made an entrance just for him. I will tell you, if you read books and you watch the movies, it's just a little pet peeve of mine, and I've made the same mistake. They keep saying that it was in North Troy, Vermont, in high water, Quebec. No, it's actually Vermont in high water, Quebec. Nothing too bad, but the only reason it says North Troy is that's the mail-in address. Jay doesn't have a post office, so everything goes to North Troy. But there's been movies made on this. There's been books, but if you ask, it's astounding. If you ask even history teachers, tell me about Space Research Corporation, have no idea. I think it should be taught in every school because there's so many things that you can debate. It's like, for example, people who work there, most of the people were just ordinary, like machinists. They weren't anything, they weren't like these people who were doing espionage or anything. They were just ordinary people. And some of them worried during the Persian Gulf War that if some of the weaponry that was made there or retrofitted there were going to kill one of their kids that were at war. So, no, it's a great story. I will proudly say, when I record history, I'm not afraid to write things kind of gnarly, because history is history. Sometimes it's a pretty gnarly thing, and I'm not afraid to write about it. And I'm actually pretty proud when I get. I wrote the history of Newport at the 100th anniversary. Vast majority of the book is all pretty stuff. There's some gnarly articles in there, and I'm fond of holding up that book and saying, this book got me unfriended by the mayor of Newport. and it's just, it isn't, history can be, I don't look at it as a bad, it's bad, but it's gotta be told. And some people mistake me for a PR person. I'm not PR. I just like history, and I like little gnarly pieces of history. And it's all just, let me put it this way. If I wanted to make money, I wouldn't be standing here and I wouldn't be doing this. There's no rhyme or reason. And that other than the love of doing it, of course, I go to almost 50 states, but it's not a field. Like if somebody told me, like when I asked let's say I asked 10 friends, when I started thinking about this 25 years ago, I asked probably 10 people, and 9 people said, "Are you nuts?" The other person I listened to the 10th person, and I tell him all the time, I don't know if I should have listened to you. But so that's what I do. My whole life has been shaped by other people's lives, and I think I just can't believe how fortunate I have been to be able to do what I do, and that people are so willing to share their stories. And most of the people, if people are jumping up and down and saying, I have a story to tell you. Yeah, sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't. But then sometimes it's the person who says they don't have a story. I'll tell one last story of a fella. WCAX wanted me to do a Pearl Harbor event at a nursing home. So, okay. It was a nursing home, and then WCAX got involved. And during the event, this old man, all attached to stuff, and obviously, he's getting ready to move on to greener pastures. He spoke up during it, and he talked about being a POW of the Germans, being shot out of the air. He was a crewman on an airplane, and he talked about the death march of the Germans near the end of the war. And then I was in the store, and this guy says to me, "How did you get my father to talk for 15 seconds about the war?" He said, I learned more about the war in 15 seconds from him. He said he never spoke about it. And his name was Harley Bly. And I said, and Sam Bly, and Sam, his name was Harley, but he went by Sam. And I said to the son, better yet, he wants me to come back, and he wants to tell me the real story. So he says, "Oh no, Dad, he only talks a few words a day now." And so I went over, and the nursing home people just kind of chuckled. He says, "You're not going to be able to talk to him. He can't talk for more than a few minutes." I said, okay. I got in there, turned on my tape recorder. For an hour and a half, he just went chatter. He said, "You want to come back?" Yeah. Came back a couple other days. And he remembered details by details of camp life, looking out the airplane when they got hit. And he said, "I'd never pulled a parachute before." And he hit the ground, and he says, "I looked over," they all said, the airmen said, the last people you wanted to be picked up by was the people you were bombing. And so we saw the military coming, and we surrendered to them. And he went and, he talked about picking, when they were on the death march, picking up picking through the dirt, getting potatoes, eating raw potatoes. And he even talked about some of the guards, they were nice old men. He says they didn't treat it. He said they wanted no part. Kind of like, he did say there were some like Sergeant Schultz, on Hogan's Heroes. He said most of them were old men. He said they didn't want it. So the family were like, how? And I said, well, because he was ready to die. He even said, "I'm ready to die." And I said, "Watch this." It was a 3-part series. I said, "He has one more mission." I said, "Once that series is done, he will die." And he did. He just wanted to tell his story. And so many people, they just want to tell their stories. And sometimes it's a lot harder to tell your family. Sometimes it takes somebody like me just to ask. And here's the other thing. A lot of families will say, especially painful things, oh no, don't talk about that. He doesn't want to talk about that. No, it's you don't want to feel their emotion. And yeah, I've had many cases, but Sam was just like, yep, he checked out. Once he told his story that he had suffered with for all those years, I've done it. I swear I've been through the jungles of Vietnam. I do spend time in Asia, but I've never been to Vietnam, but I've interviewed enough Vietnam veterans now to feel their pain. And and so it's been a good life. I couldn't have done this without my now late wife. I always said she was the brains of the outfit. Luckily, I now have a partner who is also brains of the outfit. We just travel, and she couldn't be here. She's in another country right now. But yeah, so that's my life. That's my work. And yeah, I do have hats and books and everything over there if anybody, coffee cups, because you know what is, I've had to diversify some, because if I just stuck on writing, I'd be out there, I'd leave here and do some dumpster diving. But I love doing what I do. I'll go to Bob and I were talking, he's retiring and I'm 60. And I think, where did this come from? We were talking retirement. And I'm saying, hey, what's the best age to retire at? Because in my mind, I'm still 35 with two sons who are 39. So, all right, well.
Can we ask you a question?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Your periodical comes out every single month.
Every single month.
How do you plan each issue? Are people always writing? Are you always in the field looking for people?
No, it just happens. It just like I'm always thinking. And people are always submitting, and you just piece it together. I didn't even miss a beat. And I hate to say this because I was the caregiver for my wife. And by the way, if I can follow in her footsteps, like she was the funniest, happiest, dying person. And I used to say, how can you do this? She says, because the doctors even say, is she in denial? I said, oh no, she's not in denial. She wanted to die her way. And she said, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die having a good time. And we traveled the country. We visited our friends. We visited our family. And I just brought the computer. Along, and I have a great little team. I haven't seen my two key people in like 3 years. We all work from home. And it's just, yeah, it comes like if you remember when you're in school, a teacher will say, write about anything. Well, I don't get anything to write about. I can write about anything, or anything interests me. My partner, she's from Southeast Asia, but she lived in the Middle East for the last 20-something years because she's a traveling nurse. And so that's just, now I'm over, I've poked around the Northeast Kingdom. Now I'm over asking a rice farmer, hey, can I ride your carabao? Sure. So I it's just who I am. They just love me over there. When the rice, because before she was a nurse, she grew up in a rural village on a rice farm. So when we go back and we visit her family, and they just love how I embrace them as much as I embrace the Northeast Kingdom. Because despite what the world, if you turn on the news and you listen to the news, you listen to politicians, we all hate each other. No, we don't. Everywhere I go, I find wonderful people. Yes, there's bad, and there's bad people, bad things, but they're in the minority. And so I just keep going. My wife, the one thing she said, you will grieve, but I do not want grief to become you. Because, and it's hard if anybody's lost a spouse or a child, it's not easy, but I continue to live, and I will continue to live until I have no more life to live, and I will continue to record stories, whether it's here or whether it's in Southeast Asia or the Middle East, because you know what? Most of our stories are very similar. It's just different names. Maybe like my Nens's family were rice farmers. My late wife's family were loggers. Stories are almost identical, just harvesting different things. Any more questions?
I was wondering, when you were talking about Burke Mountain and, you know, the troubles they're having, but I was just wondering some history that I remember someone telling me about, but I don't even remember where or when, about the history of Burke Mountain, that it was originally donated by the Darling family to the state of Vermont under the condition that it would remain a wilderness for eternity.
I can't really answer. I'm really weak. That was Amy Ash Nixon who wrote that one, and I'm not real. But the good thing is, I think that is starting to, but it's certainly not wilderness now, is it?
Right, no, exactly. That's what I was wondering if you
No.
No, okay.
Yeah. You want to end with another? And by the way, I didn't even, what is your name?
Doesn't come there.
Yeah, okay. Sarah. Well, I didn't, he was the first one to greet me, and he blew my ego right up. First thing he said, I've read everything you've...
I'm on all those articles. Every one.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
There's merch over there.
Yep.